Yeah, lovely, got that. Fabulous. So I won't spend too long on me. So 20 years working in technology, in the main in the not-for-profit sector, predominantly, as it mentions there, in transformation and sort of innovation roles. Really passionate about digital democratization, which is why generative AI is one of the topics that I cover. Like colleagues have already mentioned, it's very, very accessible, and there's some ethical and responsible considerations around that. And again, in equal measure, women empowering women. So as I said, I've spent a long time working in technology, as many of you, I'm sure, very much a male-dominated industry, and it can sometimes feel as new topics come along, or topics that have been around for a while become very popular, that we can be in this position, or I have felt personally in the position of colleagues trying to blind me by the science. So some of today is about let's just get rid of the nonsense, hopefully give you some useful information that you can take forward into conversations and feel legitimate in your opinions if you don't already. But a couple of recent projects. So as I mentioned there, AI readiness assessment tool for Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, and lots of sector press. So as I said, not for profit, mainly in social housing. So sector press and European events talking on one of my favourite topics, generative AI. So we will get into some useful information. So Kevin, I assume that I can share the slide deck and things after the event for colleagues. So
absolutely,
hopefully there's
yeah.
Fabo, hopefully some useful bits that you can take away into your respective roles. So as it says here, over a third of people in the UK have now used generative AI, as it mentions there. Nice age bracket as well, 16 to 75. So that first little myth busted, that it just sits with particular age groups, doesn't. A broad range of people using generative AI. 7 million have used it in the workplace, interestingly, which is that 66% increase from a year ago. And we'll come on to the sort of exponential growth of generative AI shortly. We'll also come on to a description of what is generative AI. So I'll come on to that for you all. So of those, 1 in 10 are using it daily, as you can see here, all the way through to 2 in 5 using it less than monthly. So it's even those that are using it less often are still using it on quite a frequent basis. Really, if we think about it, it's still a relatively new technology. There isn't a lot of governance and control really around its utilisation. And this last one, and I'll pause for a second, of those that are very much around boosting productivity, and where we've got a smaller percentage that the sort of active encouragement from employers. So I'll just pause there for a second. I don't know, is any of those sort of statistics, does that align in with everyone's thinking? Is it sort of like, oh, it's higher or it's lower than I expected?
High than I expected.
Mm.
Especially using it for work.
Yes, yeah, yeah, well. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And as you, yeah, no, definitely. I think we just keep seeing the percentages increase and increase. Yes, it is interesting. And like you said there, Kaylee, that age range, I find that as well. That age range is interesting, and it's just let's bust that first myth that it just sits with a particular age group. It doesn't. So we'll just go, made some reference there around growth. So I've got a couple of bits and bobs just to share with you here. So that first graph on the top there, that's got the little blobs on it, as you could tell, I speak in very technical language. These is examples of the number of research papers that have been published across the months. And the reason that this graphic is here to share with you is showing you the rate at which generative AI is evolving. So each one of these research papers is demonstrating a different broad industry use case for the utilisation of generative AI, whether that be around research and development for healthcare, whether that be around the automotive industry, it could be where we're starting to see an increase of government usage, but these are global research papers. So as you can see, real significance there in terms of the numbers that have, and that trend line in terms of those that have been submitted and published. Applying a slightly different view is when we look at that time to reach 100 million users. So as you can see, when we look at some of these really popular, woven into the fabric of us culturally, so whether we've got TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, Spotify, really woven into the fabric and the language that we use on a daily basis, and the number of months it took to get to that position, where, as I said, in some cases there's not necessarily a distinguishing mark between the type of technology and the brand name. So Google's a good example, isn't it? We'll Google something, we don't search for it. So as we see that ChatGTP, so I'm sure you're already aware, but ChatGTP is one of the main sort of brand names alongside Microsoft Copilot of generative AI that is available to all. It has a free version. You literally just like ChatGTP into your search navigation bar, and it's there for you to serve as many needs as you can possibly chuck at it across the day. So within a 2-month period, ChatGTP reached 100 million users. So it's a huge number of users in a very, very short period of time. And when you mentioned, yes, quite, and when we were talking around I think it was yourself, Beth, and you were talking about governance, and you'll see we'll come on to it in the slide deck, is absolutely why that governance element of it is so pivotal. We've got a couple of slides on that, and that's really and truly where focus needs to be in my opinion. So yes, really interesting that you know that you can see that increase there. So I've talked a little bit around generative AI, and I'm conscious that term AI is being used in a number of different guises, and it's a very popular term. So I just want to go on to what it actually means, because it's a very popular term and it's getting bandied about a lot. So what we have is robotic process automation and machine learning. These types of, again, if I'm talking about what you already know, then just like let me know, we can approach it in a slightly different way. Or if I'm using terminology that doesn't make sense, just holler up and I'll again change how I'm explaining things. So I won't be explaining it right for you. So robotic process automation and machine learning. These types of AI have been around, as it says here, for decades. It's very well established technologies, very, very well established technologies. What we're seeing in the marketplace, in the software marketplace, is the term AI. We have AI in our products, AI in our telephony products, AI in our finance systems, our HR systems, our support systems. You know, we've now got AI in all of our systems. It's already been there. It was there before, and it's a branding activity. You'll see here, we've given some examples where this type of artificial intelligence is used, and you can see it's basically a set of instructions, an algorithm, a formula. That's what this particular type of artificial intelligence is. There's no learning associated to it for that particular technology, in that you have to give it the instruction. It will return a result based on the instruction you've given it, and that's it. That's what it does. Really useful. And we've given some examples here. Really, really useful. However, it does have limitations. And because of those limitations, we've been less concerned from a sector point of view, from an industry perspective, and culturally, we've been less concerned about that until we get into the main part of our conversation today, which is this generative artificial intelligence. And we've just included a description here. And as I said, these slides will be shared, and it may prove useful as you have subsequent conversations. So this newest class, as we all know, we've talked about how much is being talked about at the moment. And where we all get a bit nervous, rightly so, is around the prediction. So we're going to give a really big data set, or a really big data set is used to teach that particular, as they're called, models. So they're going to teach the generative artificial intelligence based on a whole raft, gigabytes and gigabytes of data. And because we've given it gigabytes and gigabytes of data, it can now make predictions based on the patterns that it finds in that data. By doing that, that supports us, in theory, to be able to, as it mentions there, create efficiencies in the ways that we are. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, really good point. It absolutely has been normalised. Yes, really good point raised there. It's already, isn't it, as we said before, woven into the fabric of our conversations. Yeah. Absolutely woven into the fabric of conversations that we're having. So as it sort of says here, many tools are free, they're available at minimal cost, which is fantastic in terms of that inclusive. A little bit more of a concern will come in when we look at risk around how these tools are being used and interpreted, and we'll come on to some stories as we move through. But hopefully you can see that difference. One, you give it a set of instructions, it can literally just work within the confines of those instructions. One, the next one that we're talking about here, it can start to predict based on the patterns and trends that it sees in the data that's been provided with. Again, something to bear in mind, it's provided with those sets of data. And then lastly, for this conversation, we're talking about artificial general intelligence, which is that next step along. So if you imagine, what have we got? We've got some models, or we've got some examples where we are able to look at being able to ask sets of questions, give a set of instructions, ask to generate something, create something, do something for me, using that generative artificial intelligence. This next wave along, as you can see here, is where they are pulled together, and by pulling these models together, or pulling these different use cases together, puts us in a position ultimately where you have these models looking at a range of problems, as it's sort of mentioned here. So another iteration of the sort of artificial general intelligence is this term agentic AI. Now, anyone who keeps close to Microsoft in terms of seeing what they pop up on LinkedIn or other socials, or just through communities, will see that they have introduced agentic AI into Microsoft Copilot. So in theory, and I'm going to use the word theory, in theory, as it mentions here, you can pull these different agents, models, use cases, all sort of mean the same thing. You can pull them all together and it'd be in a position where these products are making decisions on their own. So when, Kevin, you mentioned that you had conversations with IT leadership groups, and they're like, what are we going to do? You know, are they going to take over the world? Is it going to mean that sort of people are needing to reskill and move into new opportunities, or move into different roles completely? Ultimately, potentially, at this point in time, as in 2025, no, I wouldn't. Not at the moment, because in terms of our level of the level of understanding, the level of skill required, and as I said, we'll come on to some of the gotchas around bias, etc. As we go through this presentation. Not quite there yet. Potentially on the roadmap of the future, but not quite yet. Did those explanations help and make sense before I move on to some example products? Yes, marveloso. Yes, thank you ever so much, David, for popping those definitions in. Thank you. So yeah, so as you can see there, brilliant. Thank you for that. So different types of generative AI, because if we see so much in the press, So deep fake is a really good example where we have perhaps been seen in the press, where there's been sort of experimentation done around what happens if I Google a particular job role or a particular type, and what am I getting in return when I sort of look at those results. So there's a number of different types, and you'll just see here some example products. So just to give you a bit of a view that it's not just around text or data where we see generative AI being used. It's got obviously a really broad range of uses. And some of these we've talked about already. So as David has mentioned, around that GTP phrasing. But as I said, you can see some other examples here, and hopefully, because it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour today, granted, but hopefully it starts to give you a bit of an indication that there are a number of different types. So any colleagues that work in where you have colleagues that work in marketing, work in the creative sectors. This is why obviously there's been a lot of understandable sort of discussion and sort of precedent being made from a law point of view, because of, in theory, what generative AI could do in terms of recreating or extending that sort of creative IP owned by those individuals. So if this is all making bits of sense, I shall move on. Yeah. So where you see down the bottom on the maroon coloured section, so those multimodal models just means you've got, it's like Toys R Us, all of that under that one roof. So you've got the natural language, text, image to text, voice and image, as well as some of those, as I said, within that category. The custom that we've made reference to a little bit, that's where these types are, as it mentions here, designed with a specific use case in mind. So I have a particular objective that I want to meet. And then where you see sort of integration, so Microsoft, we've talked about Zoom is another, and there are obviously others growing all the time. So hopefully that's useful. If any questions on that before I move through? Nope. Okie coke.
I
So,
have a question.
oh, hiya.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Sidra.
I just wondered that in your work day to day, which of these tools do you use, or your team or your organization uses, and which are still like an aspiration?
Yeah, no, very much so. So we're also use Microsoft Copilot a heck of a lot. I use it every single day in the role that I have. There's some mid-journey and Claude use as well by the team. So as I said, I work in consultancy, so quite a lot of the work can be around marketing content and the generation of bid material. And quite often we are using different forms of generative AI to help create that content. So yes, so we do use it on a daily basis. And if we get a chance at the end, I can talk a little bit about that journey, if that would be useful for others to hear about how we've got there responsibly, ethically, safely. Because we didn't start there.
Thank you.
We definitely didn't start there. It was the Wild West. So yeah, we can come on to that. Hopefully we'll get time. So one of the sort of pieces that Kevin put in things like, let's bust some myths. And I recognise this is a bit tricky to see, but as I said, we'll share the slides afterwards. Is everybody familiar with Gartner? If you're not, it's fine. I can just explain who they are. No. Okie dokie, smashing. Got a mixture, so I will explain who Gartner are. So Gartner are a international industry agnostic advisory and technology advisory service. They are who we look to in terms of horizon scanning, different technology trends to be considering across the next 5, 10, 15, and very much where we look to in terms of getting an independent view around software, infrastructure, anything and everything you could think about in the technology stack. For anybody who doesn't currently sort of look at Gartner materials, I'd very much advise it. You do have to slightly get used to like the Gartner language, but there's a lot of material that's absolutely free to access and is very interesting, and again just really supports those conversations you may be having around the leadership table, because it covers anything and everything, and there's a heck of a lot of organisations that contribute to a heck of a lot of benchmarking information, which again is really handy to review. This and Gartner coined this term hype cycle. So they have hype cycles for anything and everything, and in this example obviously we're looking at generative AI. What I've pointed out on here, if you can see, is a couple of key points around particular generative AI models. So we've got about the models, and we've got about the sort of, if you can see that bottom one there, around virtual agents. So at a point in time, and if we were to listen to sector, if we were listening to the press alone, we would feel that we were in this position where generative AI is going to take over everything. We're going to have robots on the street, and we're not going to have, we're sort of surplus to requirement. We're not going to need to have a job anymore, because it's going to, it's going to revolutionise the silver bullet, as it's been coined on our call this afternoon. What this graph is showing you, this trend graph is showing you, is in the next 2 years, the utilisation of those predominant, the generative AI that we would use predominantly in the sectors and the industries that we work in, they're going to plateau. So what that means is, in sort of like to explain, is that it's highly likely that we will hit the ceiling of how we utilise these tools. We won't necessarily be in a position where we're extending out the use cases within the industries that we work in around that use of generative AI. So it doesn't mean that we won't continue to see a huge progression forward in certain, like from an R&D point of view in the healthcare industry is a really good example. So, will we still see that evolve? Yes, but the use case is crunch through all this data and show me the trends. The output and what you do with the output, that's obviously where we see those improvements, but that use case of crunch through a whole load of data, that's that use case, and that's what this is basically showing. So if hopefully that's made sense, and then we can talk about some actual real life applications of generative AI in the workplace. So I just wanted to share this with you to give you that indication. Are we going to continue to see an increased rate of use cases that we can apply in our workplace? Gartner is saying probably not. It will plateau, it will just balance off, it will become part of the day-to-day, become part of our fabric, as it has done, as we talked about there in the education sector already. But those different use cases that we're seeing, possibly not. How we apply it, in confines of set use cases, if this is making sense. So if I just move forward to applications in an organisation, hopefully that will help us sort of connect those two things together. So what we hear, we want everything, everywhere, all of the time. We can scale humanity. So back to this really, really sort of aspirational points. In terms of how we see it being used, as we've got some examples here, so secondary research, those chatbot services, for me personally, as part of my relaxation time or my mental health, I can use generative AI to write some poetry, tell some jokes, whatever it might be. If we look at it in terms of a few other areas, so that sort of creativity and concept development that we talked about, brainstorming ideas, problem diagnosis, problem solving, comparing, contrasting documents. So we've talked about Microsoft Pilot and ChatGPT a little bit, and it might be sort of beneficial to stick with those two examples. They're the sort of very frequently used ones on our call, just generally, so it might be beneficial for this call. So far, the pieces that I've talked about, you can use ChatGPT, you can use Microsoft Copilot to compare one document with another, to interrogate data, to ask for advice and guidance, to brainstorm ideas. You can use those tools to do that. Comes with some risk, which we'll come on to, but you can use those tools. You can use them. Critiquing of work, as we've talked about here, diary management, coding. So what we're seeing, and I'm not sure if it's the case, I think it was yourself, Kaylee, wasn't it, that worked directly in the tech industry. Sorry if anyone else doesn't, and I've missed that. Is that we're seeing a huge increase now in developers using these projects to generate code. So that skills gap that we may have seen previous years, generative AI can be used to support the reduction of that skills gap for anybody interested in getting into sort of development and coding. We're seeing a lot of that now. Not seeing it passed on to consumers in terms of cost reduction, but we are seeing an increased use of the tools to support those activities. Again, some more examples. So, social media posting, anybody that uses LinkedIn, for example's sake, has probably seen that you can use LinkedIn, you can use the AI little agent within LinkedIn to change your content, make it potentially sound more engaging. We've got some other examples here, Excel formula and diary management. With certain licensing with Microsoft Copilot, you can use Copilot, those tools to support that as an activity as well. So whether that be, some of you may, depending on what type of Outlook, if you use Outlook, you may have seen, would you like to carve out some focus time? Would you like me to find a time? Would you like some help writing this email? All of that obviously is the generative AI. That's okay, David. Let's pause and let's also hear from yourself. That would be great. Saves me talking all the time.
I just want to say this is brilliant. Thanks very much for doing the overview. So what I'd found with especially OpenAI, because we're using that as well, is if I asked it, let's say for, I'm looking to do a deployment into Azure or into some infrastructure as code, and I need a PowerShell command. I can go to it and say, I would like a PowerShell command to do A, B, C, D, and then I get, of course, it goes out and it'll give me the code that I need. So actually, I'd like it, but I'd also like to be able to, instead putting plain text passwords, I'd like to use Azure to store the password in a hash format. If I type that in, it will amend that code that it's given me already, plus give me the input to it as well. Now, you still have to know how to use PowerShell. You need to be able to validate these things. And with the large language models, especially if you ask it a short sentence, it will pre-fill with a lot of junk sometimes, but like where becomes very wordy. But the overall generation of that has just been super, because if you just have a quick job to do and you just need to try and get to it, that's the primary one that we've been using it for. One of your previous, I think it was your previous slide, you had a list of all of the different things that you can go through with like the text to image and things like that. Well, one of the solutions that we have actually put in place was for a healthcare provider, and what happened was they had a 20-minute wrap-up time after every call. The calls themselves were coming in, people were saying, oh, I've this illness, I've this problem, and they would have to take notes and then put it into the CRM system afterwards. So there was like, call comes in, it takes as long as it takes, 20 minutes to wrap it up, and then put it into the CRM, make sure it's tidy and submit. So we took the voice to text feature was already built into their phone system. So build a connection between there and a bucket, in a storage bucket in Azure Files, and then had a script, pull it from there and push it into OpenAI with some cheeky algorithms. And it gave us two summaries. One of them was for a doctor and one of them was for
Brilliant.
like plain text. But then the fun part then was we had an integration then via the API back into the back end, so it auto-populated by the end of the call. So the person still needs to take their notes, but instead of having to type it all back in again, they just had to review. So we took their call time from a 20-minute, whatever the time of their call was, plus their wrap-up time, down to a 2-3 minute review. So we were able to get higher throughput for all of our
Brilliant. Yeah,
customer service
fantastic example.
representatives. Final one then is at the moment I was in a conversation recently with somebody who's in a mycelium farm. That's mushrooms, and they have different fungi that grow at different rates, and they have all of the technology to take images of them, and they do them in like IR light and a bunch of other outside of our spectrum. But to review those and categorize each of those mushrooms into different categories, they literally have to do like one at a time. So they were looking at sending all of the pictures into an AI model using the image review process, and it was able to categorize them at a huge rate. And all of this technology already exists. We're not inventing anything at all.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no, really bringing it to life there, really bringing it to life. And there are definitely some even sort of simpler, aren't they? Even simpler, less technologically advanced versions. So anybody that has Microsoft Copilot as a small example, or you can use ChatGPT, and the Otter is another one that sort of acts as a meeting assistant. So, you know, even in the sort of just stripping that example back even further, David, just to that call summary and sum up. Oh, not a problem, Sidra. I'll make sure you get the slides. So yeah, so even something really simple like a call wrap up, or just to summarize back, or I'm now going to send you meeting minutes from the meeting that we've just had. That done, easy peasy. So absolutely, Dave. Yeah, brilliant examples. Thank you for that.
Props.
So as we said, not an exhaustive list. So going on to some of the limitations, however, so David gave some brilliant examples there, none of which necessarily, to some extent, in the way that they've been described there, would create the risk that I'm now going to talk about. So just to sort of bear that in mind. So on the right-hand side, these are actual headlines from real things that have really happened, and there are more. So bias in the welfare system, bias in terms of from a health and from a decision-making point of view in the health sector for minority groups, in the banking sector, bias in the AI language models being used around credit decisions and hallucinations in court papers. So we'll just go through some of that. So when we talked about these language models, for just sort of putting a slightly different sort of spin on that. So those language models have been created. It's highly likely, based on a lot of research that's been done by other, in this example, a Google executive, a lady called Toju. I will pass on her LinkedIn profile, Kevin, as well as the material from today. Brilliant person, very passionate about ethical generative AI use, and also really sort of fanfaring the level of bias that there are. So this research that Toju undertook highlighted that in truth, a lot of these language models are being created by those that don't have sort of the lived experience that would go across us, go across communities, go across the diverse nature of communities and all different aspects. So we end up in this position where, and we have societal bias. Bear in mind, these language models are eating away through a whole bunch of data. That data will come out of the internet in the main. It will come through these language models that have been built. These models stem from, at a point in time, a really small subset of our communities. That's what they're learning against, or they're learning against all the stuff they can harvest out of the internet. And the internet is born out of, sadly, societal inequality and bias. So the data sets that these models are learning from are already have that bias baked in, which is why we start to see, as I said, these sort of it is unintended, but there is bias in the way that the models are created. So that's really something to bear in mind, and it goes to that last point around critical thinking. So it's really important if either you have a open policy about colleagues using generative AI in the workplace, it's something you're working towards, either way, sort of really supporting colleagues to apply critical thinking. So that critical thinking can go, am I seeing bias in the results? So I'm looking for an image. Is that a representative image of the community, or is that a representative image of just what's been spit out of the model? Also applies when you're looking at it in terms of brand and language for your organisation, because again, it's going to create a document unless you tell it to, which as David made a little bit of reference to, those prompts, as they're called, the instruction, to make sure that it falls in line with your branding. So the hallucination part is where basically it's just scooped together bits of information, it's creating case law that doesn't exist, it's creating references that don't exist. And again, it's just that critical thinking. If it's going to cite a case in a legal perspective, I best go find it. If it's making reference to statistics and research, I need to go and check that they're valid. So it's just applying that critical thinking. I will skip forward because I'm conscious of time. It would be nice a little bit at the end. So risks. So we've talked a little bit around that. The risk of bias, that ethical utilisation, responsible utilisation, right tool, right job. There is going to be occasions where you want to use generative AI and occasions when you don't. So if you have a very difficult complaint that's very specific, you may not wish to apply generative AI to create a letter for you because it's very unique and specific and very sensitive, and you need to be mindful. But it might be for low value, high volume tasks, you may wish to apply generative AI. So it's just really right tool, right job, right tool. We can see here around corporate cyber attacks, we're seeing those on the increase because of how documents and information is being shared in the free versions of these products that we've made reference to. So by doing that, you're just opening out the doors, you're sharing a lot of sensitive information, that doorway is open, and it just increases the likelihood of a cyber attack. We talked about, as I said, that data leakage. So data leakage, we'll just move on to that. So in the free versions of the products that we've talked about, because they're free, when you upload a document, anybody can access that document, because in essence, if you just imagine you've uploaded it to the internet, basically, like that's what you've done. When you have a paid for version, it's always going to be within the parameters of your organisation. So whether you're obviously in the discussions we're having, that will be the sort of cloud-based, but it will always be within those confines. There'll always be that parameter or perimeter that sits around. So I'm going to upload a document, but that's okay because it can't be accessed because we've got this fantastic resiliency that sits around the outside. That's not the case for these free-for versions. So if there's a takeaway, if you are aware of colleagues that are using free versions, then really look to dissuade and any sort of sharing of anything sensitive. There's been a case recently in The Guardian of a social worker who uploaded full case file, needed to do a summary quickly, getting ready for court, uploaded a full case file of a child in danger who was going to be going into care. All of that information now just there available on the internet somewhere for somebody that wants to find it. So that obviously wouldn't have been intentional, but it's just a really sort of, quick example. So back to that hype cycle, and we talked about this, and we're going to come on to governance now, which is what I'm trying to rattle a bit, so that I think this might be useful, especially to some of the things that have been said so far. So as we sort of said, if we imagine this is going to plateau, so are we going to find fundamentally new use cases? Possibly not, according to Gartner. But because of that rapid pace in which generative AI has been popular, because of how it's been used, and there isn't that shadow IT, there isn't the governance that sits around it. The governance element is where, from a Gartner perspective, they feel that that's where there's going to be longevity. So we might not see an increase in those fundamental use cases, but there's absolutely going to need to be that constant, brilliant, thank you, Neil, that constant monitoring and management, which we're now going to come on to. So the little blob, which you may not have been able to see, stands for AI TRISM. Now, this is a Gartner coined term. However, it's very relevant. And you might start to also see this if you're reading any materials around that connection between generative AI and security. So as you can see here, it stands for Trust, Risk and Information Security Management. Got some examples there of what it's sort of been built out of. So we've talked about that ease and access. We've talked about the those malicious attacks. So whether that be in the provider themselves, or whether that be, as I said, within yourselves as an organisation. And we've said here, those large data sets, trained models, they have access to other confidential information and vice versa. So when we're looking at that from a takeaways perspective, so having, and we'll come on to those sort of where you can start steps really in a minute or two. So as I said, it's really about having that reliability, trustworthiness, security and privacy of those models. So again, we're back into that critical thinking for those of you that are purchasing the off-the-shelf models. There are sets of questions to be asked there. They can very usefully can talk about compliance with EU AI Act that needs to be shown. There's also an ISO standard that AI producers are meant to conform to. So there's some ISO, I think it's ISO 9201, I think, but I'm going from memory. I'll find out. I'll add it to the info that you can ask about if it's the case that you are having models generated for your own organisation. Same thing, you can ask if it's off the shelf in terms of compliance. Ultimately, as we've mentioned already, by having this sort of trust, risk and having a framework in place that covers all those aspects. So this doesn't sit with IT, and we'll come on to that from a summary perspective, doesn't sit with IT colleagues. This is a broad, it's a broad church, and there's lots of different elements of organisations that need to have a view and an oversight. So by doing that, does absolutely bear fruit, and David gave some great examples, and there are others as well. But that proceed with caution, ethical, responsible use, really, really important. And as mentioned, that last point there, just by having some principles in place that align to this trust, risk and information security management, just gives you that set of guidelines to build those sort of protection into AI delivery and establishing that AI governance, which I know Beth was one of the points that you said at the very, very beginning. So that governance structure, and we'll come on to it, but I'll just, as well, we've got this slide. So that's a combination of having a acceptable usage policy. Ironically, you can Google that, you can pop that into a generative AI tool and it will create an AI acceptable usage policy, the irony. But yeah, having an AI acceptable usage policy that's linked into HR, that has some recourse associated to it. Don't dive it underground, don't let it sit underground, because that's where these issues arise. So really, yes, yeah, brilliant, yeah. Having sets of principles, having a position, so I'll just move on, having a position statement in place that you're, from an organizational point of view, about how much you are planning on using generative AI. If you have a customer facing business, how much of that you're going to share with your customer, how much is around internal process and efficiency, having that ethical and considerations in that as well. So being very aware of how you're conversing with customers, and if they're using generative AI to do so, that's something obviously that they should be aware of. Understanding the current usage across the organisation, if that's something that you haven't sort of looked at yet, a really simple Microsoft form or another Google form, a simple form, keep it anonymous. If that's the sort of culture of the organisation and there's a bit of a concern, as I mentioned here, it's the carrot, not the stick. The more that you know, and remember we went back to those numbers and they were relatively high, the more you know, the more open and transparent, the less risk you're posing to your organisation. So we've seen examples of organisations that have absolutely clamped down, no usage whatsoever. People have then sent themselves stuff at home. Brilliant. We've used email, the most insecure way of transferring something. I've transferred it to my personal address. Brilliant. It's got lots of organisational information in it just from my work email address and all the bumps that get put at the bottom of my emails. Fantastic. That's opened us up. Then I'm using free versions of the products we've just referenced to, and then it's opened all out in the world. So it's really trying to avoid that happening by surfacing it, talking about it, being open. And we mentioned here that culture of change, having a programme of work, which I think was, again, something that you mentioned, Beth. Great. The suggestion, but you don't have to stick to it, is starting small, low risk pilot approach and look internally first, and then take those learnings forward in terms of what that can mean from a customer perspective. These models, as we've mentioned, are sort of at source, train on a broad range of non-organizational specific data. When you bring the models in-house, yet they're absolutely being trained on your data. So your data needs to be in a well structured, good level of completeness, good level of quality. Otherwise, when you look at the returns that you're getting when you are putting the question, the prompt in, it's not going to be representative of your full organizational data set, which could lead to, making the wrong decision, providing the wrong advice, that type of thing. And that overall risk appetite, as we said, mentioned that organisation-wide statement. So very lastly, and I'll try and do it in a minute, so we've got at least 5 minutes for questions at the end. So as we talked about, that speed of change will only increase, but that's okay. Like we've talked about, all staff are probably using it, so surface it, get it out there, have that conversation, really support and educate critical thinking, considering responsible use, considering ethical use, understanding the different versions of the products that are currently in use, acknowledging that it's being used by everybody as part of those communications, just to really again support that sort of colleagues sharing, and that's okay. And David gave some great examples of where it's created efficiencies. We all have those examples, I'm sure, or we could craft them for our organisation, really talking about the positives, as it says there, on that massive opportunities. And as I said, it isn't just the role of the IT team. We've talked about it being readily available. It is a democratized technology, i.e. I don't need to be a technology specialist to be using it. So the two go hand in hand, and working across the different functions within your organisation, working collectively to create those policies and those principles and really sort of support that sort of activity. So I will stop there. I will stop sharing. And I'm so sorry, I've given 4 whole minutes, which probably isn't a lot, is it, Kevin? I do apologise. Beth.
Firstly, thank you. That's really, really helpful, and actually quite comforting that a lot of that we are making strides towards. We've issued a policy, we've started communicating, we've started training colleagues across the organisation. I think one of our biggest challenges is just capacity, because it's moving at pace and everybody wants to do it. we can't move at the speed that they want us to. So I'm interested to hear how others or you would suggest we manage that in a, you know, giving good customer service, but also not getting run away with, which I think is a risk at the minute.
Yeah, I think, and I think you may have done this already, Beth. I'm so sorry if you have. I think it's twofold. Generative, like we've said, generative AI is moving forward. However, it will plateau. So you have these use cases. Can I use generative AI to read a whole bunch of documents and give me a summary? Yes. Therefore, all those different use cases, can I use it in legal? Can I use it in HR? Can I do a summary? Can I do an executive report off the 50-page document I've been left with? Yes. It will do all of that. So although it's moving forward, it's not moving forward at such a pace that fundamental use case changes. So then it becomes about, okay, well, what's the I think you doing already, you were talking about. So what's the value? What's the value of doing this? What's the, however you mark value, so whether that be customer outcome, whether that be efficiency, whatever, whether that accuracy, whatever the sort of, those metrics are that you have an organization. Then it's just aligning it back to those. But I think in that first instance of, yes, it's moving forward, but those fundamental use cases won't necessarily change. So therefore, the way that we want to use it, that becomes the conversation, not necessarily those different use cases. We would always advise, obviously, what we've talked already, which I think we probably do. She said to do Microsoft House, we would always, if I keep it in the 10th. So can I use, so an example that I used very recently is, I want to use I'm going to use ChatGTP. Okay, bit of a question. Would you leave your laptop open in a coffee shop? No. Would you pin up sets of documents in a notice board in a library? No. At this point, this person always thinks I'm going to do lally. Right. By taking all those documents and putting them, would you share your password with like a stranger in a supermarket? No. Right. But by using these free versions and uploading business sensitive, commercial, whatever documentation, it's the same thing. Now, none of us would ever do that. Like, nobody would ever do that. If it's all right, I'm just going to shout down to the supermarket the name, address, and date of birth of one of my clients. Like, nobody would do that. And I know they're silly analogies, but they're like silly on purpose. And thank you for liking them, David. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And at that point, it may not have, hopefully some of this is work, Beth, hopefully. At that point, there's that bit of a, okay, it's not going to be able to make me a brew at 6 o'clock in the morning, is it? No. That human bit element's always going to be there. Are there ways in which we can use these tools? Absolutely, but it has to be safe, it has to be ethical, and it has to be responsible. We don't want to be in the press. In those guardian examples we've given, there's some really lovely examples. I think it was from Neil that popped up as well. There's examples everywhere. We don't want to be that organisation. You're welcome. And I think so. Yeah. So I would say that, Beth, we've seen examples where the executive floor has had Copilot and they don't know what to do with it. Brilliant. So yeah, I echo that, and I've seen it, and hopefully that's been helpful.
We're giving it to their PAs.
But that's perfect. But that's if we look at some of those examples, that's really good time management, document rewrites. Just because I'm an executive doesn't mean I am a scholar of English, does it? We've all seen that. So it makes absolute sense, and they're brilliant use cases within that perimeter of like the paid for versions, and the cost isn't particularly high now. Copilot have done a lot, really ramped it down, especially in not for profit where it was ridiculously unobtainable at a point in time. Seemed really reduced it right down now. And so if that's helped or not, let me know.
That's really helpful. I think so we have done that. Sorry, I'm doing lots of talking. We have done that, kind of tell us what you're using, and we're getting a list, and there's huge amounts of chat GPT use, and I think that's the next thing that we need to get a handle on to really understand what people are doing, and to add that layer of governance over the top of it. So
chat really GPT is good in, can you make this document sound like that document? It is good, but you can get paid for versions of chat GPT which keep it within the perimeter, and as I said, Copilot with the right data structures, like like SharePoint usage and all of that good stuff, you can recreate that. But as I said, it's just that would be like, yeah, make sure it's the paid for versions would be, yeah. But yeah, and it's okay, as I said, to be using different tools for different things because they serve different purposes, and that's okay. But yeah, Neil, sorry, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, Beth, Lauren, thank you very much for this. I think it's some really good content you presented here, and at the appropriate pace as well. And I think there are two takeaways clearly from this. One is, and this is not new to AI in any way, but is that critical thinking. Don't necessarily believe everything you read. I was in I was in a quiz night recently, as an example, and it wasn't me, but a colleague on the table. We were not agreeing with the quiz master on the answers, and all my friend did is he immediately just went to Google and just typed in something or other, and it came up with an answer. It wasn't the right answer, but it was actually, but he believed what he read, and it's just like, and I was going, you know, anyway. So that's one thing, and the other thing, again, not new, but it's exacerbated by AI because of the speed of change, is again security of data, and we're all quite familiar with, you know, we've heard all the stories about various government departments over the years leaving USB sticks on trains, or even, as you say, just, you know, that printed piece of paperwork and then just left it on the train seat or pin it to the notice board, and like David said, that's a really good analogy that you mentioned. But now this is just happening more and more, right? We're making those things more available because it's out of the domain of, you know, it's outside of direct, you know, that user printing those activities out. And it's so easy to do. So, you know, to me, those are the biggest takeaways from any conversation about AI. Nothing new, but it's even worse now than it, you know.
Yeah, I think it's perfect summary, Neil. Might have to borrow that in the future. Perfect summary.
Oh, I'm borrowing everything you said already, Lauren.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree with you, and I think you're absolutely right in what you said there. You know, different forms of AI have been used for years and years and years. This is an iteration. Yes, it does, Beth. This is an iteration of, it's an evolving of. The really big houses, such as Microsoft, they are also really pushing this human intervention element. So for them, who have been obviously years of research to get to this point, and you know, billions and billions of investment, are going, do you know what? It's got its limitations, everybody, and we all need to be cognizant of that. Just says it in its own right. And I think, like we've said, just surface it, just you know, as using those statistics, which have come from Deloitte, by the way, you know, using those statistics, we accept and we acknowledge that as an organisation, colleagues will be using generative AI, using those analogies if that feels fit, or something similar. So we now need to have that pause moment potentially, or we need to have that conversation. No, it's not, Beth, about using a version that keeps safe, and it keeps that individual safe as well. So I am more prone to a cyber attack on me as Lauren Trevelyan if I've been using these free versions, because I've opened that gate, and that gate's two-way.
Yeah,
I've opened it now.
The other thing, sorry, to talk about, you know, why
No,
data's out there. Everyone uses Facebook. You know, many people can use Facebook or any other. They're sharing their data on Google, right? Gmail and things. I know, I'll put my hand up for that. So exactly the same is going on there. You're already giving out access to your own content. Just be very cautious.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. So I will be sharing the slides from today with Kevin. Thank you. I made reference to a Gartner report, so I'll add that in as well. I can't multitask, my brain can't multitask. So if I mention something and I can't see it when I look back at the transcript, please just do mention to Kevin and I'll make sure I share it on. Yeah, no, you're really welcome. It's been lovely to chat with you all this afternoon. So if it would be useful through, you know, discussions with Kevin to perhaps do something again where perhaps it's not so content heavy and we can have a bit more of a sort of discussion. Ethics is always a great one, great lunchtime conversation to be having on the ethical side of it all. So yeah, anything like that, I've mentioned to Kevin already, more than happy to run and, you know, to be part of any subsequent sessions if that would be useful.
Thank you, Lauren. Really good session.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you very much indeed.
Have a good afternoon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.